Good day, I'm Administrator Adam Southgate, and today's lecture will be covering the Stoots hailing from one of the many subspheres. Imagine for me, if you will, you witnessed an eldritch being, your mind shattered and broken, leaving you a husk of who you were. A grim fate to be sure, but what if the eldritch being, looking upon you, gibbering and screaming, found you to be cute, taking you on as a kind of pet? It cares for you and tends to your needs, but is the reason you were robbed of your mind. It's a horrific fate, but also one we have imposed upon another kind of being. This is what today's entity confronts us with, but before I get ahead of myself, I'd like to mention the Order's Discord to help keep our hunters organized. It's broken up into different roles based on rank and which Earth you belong to, if any. Along with this, we conduct our contracts through this system, so I hope to see you all there. Now then, on to our Hunters update, and today we have 2 contracts to quickly recap. Firstly, the Unidentified Anomalous Activity contract. Hunters Bonemeal Boy, that one guy, and the Hardy Boys took on the contract, arriving at the terrace house in question. After questioning the resident, they found that he himself had only suffered mild anomalous events, objects moving on their own, and a picture having its eyes scratched out. He also described how a friend who was visiting experienced a more severe event, where he felt himself drown where he was sitting, and even went through the sensation of death. After it was over, the man was unharmed and sat where he was when the event began. The homeowner had noticed nothing out of the ordinary during all of this. The team asked about any recent tragedies, of which there seemed to be one. However, the homeowner said that he needed some time before he could discuss it and asked that the hunters look around while he readied himself. It was while ascending the stairs to the upper story that the first event happened. Within an instant, the stairway became infinite in both directions, trapping the hunters. They reported experiencing days within this environment and only broke out when they attempted to walk in 2 different directions, which caused the anomalous event to fall apart. Through similar events throughout their investigation and more questioning of the homeowner, it was discovered that he had been involved in a traffic collision. He and his wife were estranged, and their daughter alternated living with each parent. While driving the daughter home one night, for a moment he looked away from the road as she was fussing next to him, and the other car slammed into them. The homeowner blamed himself for the incident, as he was the only survivor, though after some digging and the entity forcing the hunters to relive the event, they discovered that the other driver had veered onto the wrong side of the road, causing the accident. The entity was an entropic ghost of the daughter, who was trying to show her father that the accident was not his fault. Secondly, the Carmarthen Necromancer Transport Contract. Hunters Alex Beauchard, Jack, and Lewis took on this contract, where they needed to transport a defecting necromancer from a Cardiff safe house to the town of Carmarthen, where he would be extracted by American RRR members who would take him into custody. The necromancer was doing this willingly, as he had learned something even he found disturbing about what Alan Thorne was planning, and the other necromancers now wanted him dead. Thankfully, he had agreed to hand over this information after he'd been safely delivered into the hands of the RRR. The trip itself was no easy drive, as the team were constantly under threat, firstly hitting a roadblock created by the necromancers and having to fight off undead dressed as road workers, secondly having to deal with a head with spider legs coming from every orifice, thirdly having to fight off bat-like humanoids that assaulted the cars while they drove, and finally having to fight off an undead Conrathed with High. It was touch and go multiple times, however the team eventually reached their destination, where they learned the secret the necromancer was holding. As it turns out, Alan Thorne has been keeping the other necromancers under its thumb with the threat of force, but also with the idea of a kingdom of the dead. The tower, built around the Path Maru, being a proof of concept for how they will kill all within Wales. However, the truth, which was only discovered due to the necromancer they were transporting being placed in an almost clerical position, was far more worrying. Alan himself has mostly abandoned the path of transformation and become a pathless necromancer interested only in his own power. He has been using the other necromancers to ascend himself. Alan has been sending out necromancers to hunt down various objects relating to the different paths, but mostly he's been after one Path of Life artifact in particular. An old device that allows the wielder to force others to fully believe whatever the wielder wants. It was originally made so that the creator, a Path of Life necromancer, could simply tell his victims to follow him, rather than needing to subdue them. Alan's true plan is to, using multiple of the Path Maru towers, kill all within Wales, then using the artifact, force all the entropic entities that will be created from the mimicking of the recently deceased to believe he is a god. Once this is done, he will use a ritual he's had other necromancers researching that will infuse those entities that believe he is a god into himself. This will make it impossible to return them to their benign state, securing his power as he will never degrade due to lack of belief, as his worshippers, all 3 million of them, will be locked within him, unendingly believing he is a god. Needless to say, we need to discover what this artifact is and then secure it before he does. The subspheres are almost impossible to predict. Many are simply diminished reflections of our own, where the larger universe has begun to crumble, but a powerful entity is holding together a small island of reality. While your first thought may be some horrific monstrosity keeping a reality together, this is not always the case, as some of these powerful beings can be rather benign. Humans, nearly indistinguishable from ourselves, have breached into our sphere from various subspheres, and while yes, some are gibbering mutated husks of screaming flesh, others are simply people. They've described how they live on a world without stars, but otherwise things are relatively peaceful, and they have no knowledge of the being keeping their reality from falling apart. While others know the entity keeping their reality intact personally, an omnipresent god figure that has conversations with each of them within their minds, offering them advice with their daily problems. In fact, those who breach from such a subsphere describe a profound loneliness without the second voice within their head, as to each of them the being was essentially their closest friend. But just as with the greater spheres, the subspheres can be wildly different from our own, with completely different life, rules of physics, and even possessing a different number of physical dimensions. The wild variation makes it difficult to deal with breaches from subspheres, as it's nearly impossible to know what we will be dealing with. From a man named Frank who has no knowledge of ice cream, to a fourth-dimensional hamster that seems to appear and disappear at random within our world. Today's entities are no exception to the randomness of the subspheres, a six-limbed furry creature that bonds for life with a single human whose true story is far more complex and disturbing than anyone could have guessed. The Stutes, first named and described by Dr. Stuart Jennick in 1857, appear at first glance as adult human head-sized balls of fur with two overly large eyes. However, the truth of their form is revealed after looking under their triple-coated fur. The shape of their body is that of a backwards-facing capital L, a fact concealed by the amount of long fur that comes from their backs. The heads are very round, with two large eyes that take up 30% of their skulls. Above each eye is a small orifice that acts as the creature's nostrils and, surprisingly, their ears, the air passing over eardrum-like organs before entering the lungs. Their mouths are very much like our own, however, their teeth are exclusively for grinding, being flat and mortar-like. Surprisingly, they seem to constantly grow from the root, with the grinding of their teeth keeping their growth in check. Their upper torso is devoid of body fat, being composed of dense, wiry muscle, with two multi-jointed arms each side that can be hidden comfortably within the fur. Each hand possesses 3 digits, with one being an opposable thumb. Their hands are surprisingly dexterous for beings that are unable to create tools. Heading down to the lower torso and the bottom of the L, this is where the Stoots hold all their body fat, keeping their center of gravity low to the ground. They possess 4 leg limbs, the front 2 bending in the opposite direction to the back 2, and these are about twice as long as their arms. The 4 feet of the creatures, while not as dexterous as their hands, are able to grab onto objects, allowing them to ascend obstacles without difficulty. Mentally speaking, their intelligence does have rather a wide range, going from that of a dog to that of a great ape. These more intelligent individuals, while they cannot create tools, will use them in a basic fashion, utilizing sticks to pull objects that are out of reach and the like. With training, these Stoots can even learn to fetch various objects on command. Interestingly, Stoots universally will bond to a single person. This bonding can only be initiated by the Stoots themselves, where they will pick an individual person that they will become linked to. Before it became illegal, it was common for hunters to go to Stoot breeders when a new litter was born. They would then stand in front of the new litter and wait. The young Stoots would smell the person while climbing all over them. Then, at the end, one Stoot would remain upon the human, and that would be the one that had bonded to them. This bond is very strong, where the Stoot will become distressed when separated from their person. This only worsens with time until the creature dies from the physiological stresses of panic, typically after 2 weeks without contact. Even today, with new Stoots still breaching, it often happens that a hunter sent to capture the creature becomes accidentally bonded to it. The issue is that to hunters, and to be honest, people in general, they are both useful and, to be plain, adorable. After being with their person for long enough, Stoots will learn what their bonded human likes, modifying their own behavior to that which elicits the most positive reaction. Riding on their human shoulder, chirping when they get scared, and even in the case of hunters, trying to help them by bringing them ammo and the like. Those with a Stoot have described how their Stoot seems to know when they are feeling upset, nuzzling into their human in an attempt to comfort them. They are completely devoted from the moment they are bonded and will do all in their power to make their human happy. While breeding Stoots is illegal for reasons that will shortly become clear, owning one is not, as we have attempted to create an almost reserve for these small creatures. However, they are simply incapable of caring for themselves and will inevitably bond with those running the reserve. Each Stoot can only bond with a single person, and so this creates an issue where the carers each have a bonded Stoot, leaving the rest unbonded. The problem is that Stoots do not do well without a bonded human, falling into a state similar to depression. Now then, the reason breeding Stoots is illegal. After breaches by Stoots into our sphere, it was often found around the area they breached into discarded clothing, the size and shape to perfectly fit the freshly arrived entity. This raised some worrying questions about the nature of the creatures. However, either due to arrogance or not wanting to acknowledge the truth, this was ignored. A theory was quickly thrown out there that the entities within their own subsphere were pets whose owners liked to dress them up. This theory ignoring the fact that the Stoots, after breaching, immediately remove the clothing from their bodies and will not even let their bonded human put more on them. It was only after the discovery on 2 separate occasions that a Stoot breached with an odd object that the truth became clear. These objects were thin wooden boards bound together with string on one side, almost like a book. On each board, thin grooves had been carefully scraped out, making small depressions. It took some time, but it was eventually discovered that this was a kind of written language that was, after painstaking work, deciphered. The first wooden book discovered described a story of a Stoot whose home was destroyed by a great beast. The protagonist set out on a long journey, making new friends and allies and eventually slaying the beast. This was not enough for most people, however, who argued that, just as we write stories of anthropomorphized animals, maybe the Stout's original owners did the same about them. It was after the second book's discovery and translation that the truth became too difficult to ignore. It was a journal clearly written from a Stout's perspective, as he was sent to investigate a series of disappearances from a number of local villages. The way the author describes things, he appears to be from an almost medieval society with weapons similar to our swords and a king-like figure who sent him. The final page ends abruptly mid-sentence, and the book was found upon the ground open to this page with a small spoon-like implement close by. We theorize that the Stouts within their own subsphere are as intelligent as ourselves, however, suffer a similar effect as we do when we come across an eldritch being without an MMB when they breach into our sphere, being robbed of their minds and regressing to an almost animal-like state, and we keep them as pets. This revelation is what put a stop to the breeding of Stouts, at least legally. So, while hunting Stouts is not exactly a typical contract, as live capture is the only suitable outcome, there is some needed information to do so. If you have already bonded to a Stout, or you simply do not want to have one, you'll need to set up a live capture cage, with some food to lure them in. You, as the hunter, should be hidden somewhere with the cage in sight, with a line to pull which will close the trap. You'll need to be patient, as other animals may be attracted to your bait, but eventually this method should succeed. Also, make sure your trap has solid walls so that the Stout cannot see you when you go to collect it, to avoid accidental bonding. The main thing you'll be dealing with in relation to Stouts, however, will be the shutting down of illegal breeding operations. As only around 20 Stouts breach within Wales each year, demand is higher than the supply, and so some rather unsavory types have taken up the practice of breeding more. As hunters, you will be called upon to raid such locations and bring the culprits to justice. However, be warned, the breeding of Stouts is very lucrative, with each individual selling for thousands of pounds, and so the person or persons will be unlikely to go quietly. Expect heavy resistance by individuals with illegally obtained weaponry, both mundane and anomalous, who will fight you until either you die or they do. The reason for this heightened hostility is due to the penalty of breeding Stouts being life within an order prison. At one point it was death, however, we have moved beyond this, for the most part. You'll want to take on such contracts as part of a larger team, as it will inevitably boil down to a firefight, so you will not want to be outnumbered. The implication of the Stouts is one that genuinely horrifies me, as it's one where we accidentally participated in an act of horrific evil. Even now, while we are still trying to do better, we still keep Stouts as pets. They cannot survive within our sphere alone, meaning that it's with us or death. But at the back of my mind, I cannot help but feel that we like them the way they are, and if we had the ability to return them to what they were, we wouldn't take it. But that will be all for today. Please like, comment, and subscribe. With Arthur's might and Merlin's wisdom, thank you.